Welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. Hope everyone is having a great Monday morning so far and is ready for another week. We've got some interesting stories to go over in this episode. So we're talking about Deutsche Bank being the latest bank to show some signs of weakness as a result of the Silicon Valley Bank fallout. So we're going to be talking about how their credit default swaps are starting to skyrocket, what that actually means. We talked to ChatGPT and had them explain what credit default swaps actually are. We're going to be talking about TikTok's congressional hearings. So the CEO of TikTok getting absolutely grilled by U.S. Congress in regards to the security of the data, Americans' data on the platform. And then we're also going to be talking about OpenAI introducing plugins in our AI Edge segment. And then to round out this episode, we're doing something a little bit different. We mentioned on the last episode that we wanted to get back into doing more founder interviews in this region. So we have an interview with Paul Ehlinger, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Flamel. So it's a generative AI company based out of Covington, Kentucky. Awesome interview there. We're shortening those interviews down to right around 20 minutes. So you can catch that at the end of this episode. We'll also be posting that as its own separate piece of content on our YouTube channel if you want to find it there. So other than that, March Madness continues to be madness. Both one seeds got knocked out on Friday. All four are gone, but two Houston and Alabama both got beat. Good Lord. I wish Kentucky could have stuck around because it's like the most wide open bracket that I've seen in a long time. But anyway, everyone's bracket, I'm sure, is quite busted. So it'll be interesting to see who comes out on top after all of this is said and done.
Kansas State, that point guard's the real deal.
Dude, he is, man. He tore us up. He tore us up.
Well, I don't know if I didn't watch all of the last game they played, but he had a record assist.
Yeah.
And that play where he was arguing with his coach and then threw the oop, that was insane.
Man, it sucks that Kansas State.
So if they win it, I won't complain because they've got a great story. The whole team does.
They do. All right. Well, before we get into this episode, let's get a quick word from our sponsors. Middle Tech is presented by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation is currently accepting applications for its SBIR STTR Matching Funds Program. Kentucky's program is a national trendsetter for providing critical, non-dilutive capital to support the high-tech research, development, and commercialization of novel ideas within the Commonwealth. SBIR matching funds have directly contributed to the creation of more than 700 jobs, more than 200 patents filed, and more than $160 million raised in private follow-on funding into dozens of companies relocating to the state. The matching funds application window is open through April 24th. To apply and learn more about support services for companies that want to explore SBIR STTR grants and contracts, visit kyinnovation.com/SBIR. Middle Tech is sponsored by Bolt Marketing. Take your website to the next level with a website that's built to work. At Bolt Marketing, they're revolutionizing websites for small businesses that are affordable, customizable, and hassle-free. Whether you have a construction company, a boutique clothing store, or you own a hot yoga studio, they have options for you. Click the link in our show notes to explore their marketing options that can transform your marketing and grow your business. And as a personal note, Bolt Marketing built our website, and they were awesome to work with throughout the entire process. We highly recommend working with them. All right, so for this first story, we're going to be discussing Deutsche Bank being down around 20%. So if you don't know, Deutsche Bank is one of the top banks in the world, likely around in the top 25. So it's a really big deal that they are showing some signs of weakness. They're kind of the latest bank post-SVB, post-Silicon Valley Bank, that is having some trouble. And the way that they're having trouble is the credit default swaps are skyrocketing. So we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Evan, before we dive into some of the more nitty-gritty around what credit default swaps actually are, why they're important, why it matters that they're skyrocketing, give us some other details around the story, and then we'll dive in deeper.
Yeah. So Fed policymakers voted to raise rates again, the benchmark interest rate by 0.25%. So they're continuing to raise interest rates. A lot of people were questioning whether or not they would, and some people thought they shouldn't to protect banks further and prevent any more fallout and contagion and kind of worry. Because when they continue to raise these rates, if banks have any kind of security that is tightly coupled with interest rates and can create more unrealized losses, then that just creates more vulnerability in the system.
It's between a rock and a hard place, though. It's like,
yeah, for sure.
You've got soaring inflation, but also you don't want to destroy the banks by continuing to raise. So it's not a good place to be for old Jerome Powell.
Yeah, and so Jerome Powell got on camera and said, hey, this is not a systemic banking crisis. This is a few banks that had, poor governance or were taking a bit more risk than others. Silicon Valley Bank is definitely an outlier. Like, I think that one is just its own case, just because of how unique it was and the fact that 97% of their deposits were unprotected. So I do think we're still in this state where it does not look systemic, and it looks like that the companies that were a little bit more risky or had more exposure to interest rates in their securities are falling first or showing weakness first. So I don't really think we can say it's systemic yet. So I kind of agree with the Fed's decision here based on the data so far to raise rates because, I think inflation at this point, unless other banks start falling, is more important of a problem to solve.
Yeah, so I referenced one of the main problems right now that is occurring with Deutsche Bank is the fact that their credit default swaps are starting to skyrocket. And I'll be honest, I'm not a financial expert. I did not know what credit default swaps were or how to articulate that on a podcast. So I did what a lot of people are doing these days, and I asked ChatGPT to explain it to me like I'm 5. So I'm literally just going to read what ChatGPT told me about credit default swaps. So I'll share my screen here. So I said, hey, explain credit default swaps to me like I'm 5. And it did exactly that. It said, all right, kiddo, imagine you have a friend named Timmy who borrowed a toy from another friend named Sally. Timmy gives the toy back to Sally in a few weeks, but Sally is worried Timmy might not return it. So Sally makes a deal with another friend, Jenny. Sally asked Jenny to promise to give her a new toy if Timmy doesn't return the borrowed one. In return, Sally will give Jenny some candy every week. This way, Sally feels better because if Timmy doesn't give back the toy, she'll get a new one from Jenny. This deal they made is like a credit default swap. So in grown-up terms, a credit default swap is a financial agreement where one party, like Sally, pays another party, like Jenny, to protect them against the risk of someone not paying back a loan, like Timmy not returning the toy. If the person doesn't pay back the loan, the other party gives them money or a new toy to cover their loss. So that explained like you're 5 years old. I thought that was a pretty good explanation. So then I asked a second question. I was like, okay, if credit default swaps are skyrocketing, what does that actually mean? And it gave a great answer to that as well. It said if a bank's CDS, which is credit default swaps, are skyrocketing, it means that people are becoming more worried about the bank's ability to pay back its loans or debt, just like Sally was worried about Timmy returning her toy. When more people are worried, the cost of the credit default swaps, the candy Sally gives Jenny, goes up. This is because the risk of the bank not paying back its debts is seen as higher, and so it becomes more expensive for someone to protect against the risk. In other words, when a bank's CDS price goes up quickly, it's a sign that investors are concerned about the bank's financial health and are willing to pay more to protect themselves from potential losses. This could be due to various reasons like the bank having financial troubles or the overall economic conditions being uncertain.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So
the way I look at this is the same thing's happening with consumer credit and debt in general. So it's harder to get a credit card. It's harder to get a loan on a house. It's harder to get a loan on a car. So the same thing's happening in the banking system. Debt is just more expensive. That's what happens when you raise interest rates. That's intended. So this is, in a way, for the system to have these pressures on it, and for banks that have heavy vulnerabilities to any kind of debt, which most banks do, like there's going to be a bit of worry. So I think if I'm Jerome Powell, I'm probably a bit satisfied with the fact that, hey, people are getting more cautious. There's some worry around debt because that's what interest rates, are supposed to do when they raise.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see all of this play out. This is, he kind of called it out as he started raising interest rates. He's like, we're going to raise interest rates until something breaks. Something kind of broke with Silicon Valley Bank. Now we're seeing the fallout from that. I'm sure that this is we're not done seeing kind of the effects of higher interest rates. We were in a utopia with those 0% interest rates throughout COVID. So there's just gonna be some pain coming back to reality.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, Silicon Valley Bank was an outlier. I think there's definitely more, and I don't know if anything's actually broken yet.
Yeah.
I think it can get worse. I mean, the whole purpose of this is to just slow down the economy and make people not want to get loans as much and to make it harder on them. So that the weird thing happening right now related to the economy, and this is kind of a weird, tough spot, is the employment. Like employment is really healthy. And so typically you want to see unemployment rates rise with interest rates and kind of that tightening of the economy, but that's just not happening. So that just increases inflation when you have so many people having jobs and still able to buy things and money really moving quickly through the financial system. When you raise interest rates, that's supposed to slow down, and it just isn't slowing down as much as I think the Fed would like it to.
Yeah. Yeah. So not necessarily a super tech related story, but obviously very important to the overall tech ecosystem in this country. So we just kind of want to give some updates on it and just keep you guys updated post the Silicon Valley Bank failure, as obviously that was very tech related, and that's causing some different problems to occur post that failure. So moving on from that story, we had a TikTok congressional hearing for the CEO of TikTok. So obviously, U.S. Congress is starting to become a little bit more aware of the capabilities of TikTok and ByteDance and the Chinese government to access Americans' data via that app. So they sat down and basically just grilled the CEO of TikTok for like 5 hours. It was pretty interesting to watch. I always am a little bit amused watching members of Congress try and ask questions to tech CEOs or ask questions about tech they really don't understand. That was kind of another thing that stood out to me with these questions, is a lot of the questions were like not very well worded or show just kind of a lack of foundational understanding. That's kind of beside the point. What did you take away from some of the hearing that you watched?
Yeah. Well, I think TikTok's definitely dodging a lot of the hard questions. They're really trying to iterate or really trying to show that they're not sharing data with the government in China, which I think you either have to assume that they're doing it, or if you have to assume that if they're not doing it, that if the government in China wanted access to it, they'll take it. Yeah. So Chinese companies, so we have to be careful. I do think we don't want our citizens' data, especially anybody involved in the government or really high-tech companies like Tesla, SpaceX. All these people have TikTok on their phones, or their kids do. And if they're able to access that data, then the Chinese government would have access to that as well. So, I do think we have to be super careful with this situation and make sure that the Chinese government cannot access that much data about humans or about U.S. citizens. So the way I look at this is I don't want TikTok to be banned and just disappear from the United States. I would love to see a U.S. company acquire the U.S. version of TikTok, have the servers in America owned and controlled by an American company, and not allow there to be any data transfer to China. Although I don't necessarily see a path to that. I don't know if TikTok would let that happen because they're selling their algorithm, which is what the only moat that TikTok has is their algorithm. That's it. So if they sell that, then the U.S. company would basically have their entire differentiation. Just buy it.
Yeah, there's so many nuances to this discussion around, should we ban TikTok in the U.S.? Should it be allowed to continue to operate as is? And I see both sides of it. So I tend to fall more on the side of it shouldn't continue as it is, with essentially the line of command is, TikTok is owned by ByteDance. ByteDance is a Chinese company, and we've already seen how China, if they want to infiltrate the companies in their country, they're going to do it. We've seen multiple examples of that. Didi is one, Alibaba is another that you can kind of think of and point to when discussing those types of things. So I think, like Evan said, it's not a matter of if they're doing it now. You kind of have to assume that it is happening. I think there's been several TikTok engineers that said that they have been able to access American data from China. So I think more so the discussion is for me, I think the interesting part of it is around, do we want to set a precedent as the United States of banning an application just because it comes from a country that we're not necessarily getting along with? That's a Chinese thing to ban applications and software from other countries. So that also kind of complicates the discussion itself. It's like China is banning all of these American companies in their country. Should we retaliate with the same thing? It kind of goes back and forth. So Evan, do you fall on the side that you shouldn't ban it outright, but you should just sell it to another company? It sounds like is kind of where you fall. Do you agree with the side of if you ban it, that's almost like a First Amendment violation?
The way I look at it is I want to protect U.S. citizens' freedom. I could care less about TikTok. Do not care about a Chinese company whatsoever.
Yeah.
But I care about U.S. citizens having the right and the freedom to use an app that they've come to love and that they find information on the internet for and informs their opinions and gives them information. I don't want to cut that off. I would like to have a situation where TikTok doesn't disappear. It's just the ownership has changed. Yeah. But I could care less about anybody at TikTok. It's not a U.S. company. We have to prioritize ourselves as a country, and I would prioritize U.S. citizens over anybody that's involved on the business side of TikTok right now.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll set an interesting precedent as well. If we end up going forward with any sort of actual ban on it, which seems like that's what Congress is really pushing for.
Well, I think what they're doing, this is how it works. So they'll push for the same thing possible, and then it'll land somewhere in the middle. Yeah. And so that helps them kind of, they're overshooting what they're asking for in order to get somewhere in the middle, which is where they really want to be, which is what I think is going on. One of the more interesting opinions that I've heard and that I completely agree with is it just feels kind of wrong that we're doing this to TikTok before we do this with companies in our own country. Like, we haven't created a good data policy on how to govern this stuff within our own country. Who owns data? Who can share data with who? What rights do citizens have for privacy? We just haven't done any of that for companies in our own country. So Facebook, healthcare companies, there's all these companies that have so much data about us. And we've done it in certain sectors. Like I said, healthcare companies have it. It could be much better. But I think that we need to do this with social media companies in our own country before we really worry about TikTok. Like, you'd think we'd set a precedent. Here's what we do in the United States. If you don't meet this, then here's the consequences. Because now we're making it up as we go with a foreign country and a foreign company before we do it with ourselves. And so I just don't think it's a healthy way of doing it. So I would hope after the TikTok stuff, we use this as kind of like a baseline on how do we handle these going forward. And then with our own companies in our own country, how do we protect U.S. citizen data from being exchanged? Because I'm sure that all the information that Facebook has on U.S. citizens can get to China through third parties. I mean, you saw it with Cambridge Analytica. Yep. Donald Trump, arguably a lot of people think he won the U.S. election because of Cambridge Analytica. And if you look at the data, it's a pretty good case that happened. And so, how else are foreign entities or foreign companies using our citizens' data? We need to figure out how to protect that. So I just think there's a lot here and a lot of depth. And I think it all comes down to we're getting more serious about data, especially when it comes to what's happening with AI right now. I mean, data is the most important part of the tech ecosystem right now because of what you can do with it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to wrap up this part of the conversation. Data is just so critical as you think about how AI is evolving and what that data can be used for. So I think that's a good place to put a cap on that story. Let's move on to our AI Edge segment. So the AI Edge, trying to give you guys an advantage with AI. We've got a pretty big story coming from, yet again, OpenAI, one of the fastest moving companies I've ever seen in terms of the velocity of new news coming out about it and updates to their software, updates to ChatGPT and their GPT-3, then GPT 3.5, now GPT-4 models. They have now introduced plugins. So Evan, you were the first to kind of notify me about this. You're like, yo, have you seen this? This is a huge deal. And then pretty quickly after that, I saw some interesting tweets about how it works. And it really does seem like it's going to be changing the way computers, I guess, talk to each other is a way to summarize it. So give us the rundown on why this is important, how it's going to work, your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so you can imagine OpenAI is equivalent to Apple, and ChatGPT is equivalent to the iPhone, and now plugins are equivalent to the App Store. So OpenAI has, like Logan said, just executed at a pace that we've never seen before in the history of a technology company. Mm-hmm. And for them to launch these products this quickly that are this revolutionary is unheard of, and everybody should be paying as best attention as they could. So what plugins means is that you've got ChatGPT, which is what we've been sharing our screen with and showing how you can interface with artificial intelligence, ask it questions, and just engage it. Now with plugins, you can actually now plug in live data applications, and that happens right in line with ChatGPT. So, for instance, you can have an open table plugin that you can have turned on, and anytime that you type into ChatGPT, hey, book me a table at Carson's downtown Lexington at 7 o'clock for 4, ChatGPT will go do it, and it's booked, it's done. It'll respond to you and say either it's booked or here are some other times that are available, and you're basically allowing yourself to talk with Carson's without actually talking to Carson's, and ChatGPT and OpenAI is just doing that all for you. That goes for every app on the internet.
It's like translating it into the language that it's translating into code from like natural language into code, and then communicating with another software.
So, for instance, another application is live data. So there's going to be a stock market plugin where if you ask what's the current price of, let's say, Google, it'll tell you. You can say what were the earnings of Google in 19, whatever year you want. It'll just give you those earnings. You could ask it what was the growth from 2010 to 2012 in revenue. It'll tell you. Same with the NBA. You can ask, how many points did Luka Doncic have last night, and it'll just answer it. So plugins are connecting it to the internet and live data and other applications. So it's a huge deal. And the way it works, for anybody technical that's listening, the plugin kind of architecture they created and how it actually works is pretty crazy. So essentially, you can if you're a company with ChatGPT as a plugin, you basically give OpenAI your documentation and then type, just like you would to another human, what you want the plugin to be able to accomplish, and it'll create the connection automatically, and then it's done. So there's actually no coding that you have to do to connect the two applications, to create authentication, to create the UI. It does all of that automatically using, I'm sure, the Codex model that they have. It's unbelievable. This is one of the biggest fundamental shifts on the internet that this is the biggest shift we've ever seen in our lifetime, for sure.
Yeah, it's we got really excited when we saw ChatGPT, but obviously the one thing that it didn't do is connect to the internet. Then being integrated, it took a step that direction. This seems like a more robust step in that direction because you're directly connecting to different softwares that are already specialized in performing specific actions on the internet. So obviously very, very exciting.
This is you could think of Uber as a computer. You can think of OpenTable as a computer,
Wolfram,
the NBA
Alpha
as a computer. And then you're just saying, hey, computers talk to each other and then give me some kind of information or give me some kind of output, and it does it.
Yeah.
So this is the internet coming alive is what this is.
Yeah, it's it's providing a natural language user interface for every single application on the internet. It's making it just you talk to it like you would talk to a human, which is crazy. It's exciting. I guess a tip of the week, kind of off the top of my head, something that I've been experimenting with that you might find interesting and want to experiment with yourself is I'm trying to make ChatGPT. I actually have the GPT-4 model running now, testing it out. I'm trying to see if it's capable of essentially being like a life coach or a personal assistant to me to an extent. So I basically just have a full-on conversation with it of hey, here are my long-term goals. Here are a couple of the big projects I'm working on right now. Here are some of the roadblocks I'm running into with it. And just kind of conversationally going back and forth with it on what I'm wanting to do and what I'm doing currently, and having it break down projects for me into action items, having it kind of talk through struggles that I might be having with it or roadblocks that I'm hitting. And it's actually been pretty helpful. So that's just something I've been experimenting with here and there. I think that could be something interesting if you're looking for other ways to use ChatGPT. Give that a try. Put some of your goals in there and see if it can help you map out some paths to get there. So that's the tip of the week. And I think it's very appropriate to wrap up with our AI Edge segment here and go into this founder interview because, like we said, this founder is building a generative AI company off of the back of some of these APIs, Midjourney and OpenAI. So
Stable Diffusion was another one.
Stable Diffusion. That's who I meant rather than Midjourney. Yeah, thank you for correcting that. So we'll now dive into that. Again, this is an interview with Paul Ehlinger, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Flamel.
Based out of I mispronounced it. It's hard. It was hard. I have a really hard time saying some words sometimes. So I mispronounced his company's name in the middle of it.
The way you have to remember it is it's Flamel, like Nicholas Flamel in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
That I saw that in one of the articles, so that's why I was able to remember.
But yeah, Paul has a lot of ties in Kentucky as well. He was with KSTC as part of their venture arm, investing in companies here, and he has a deep background in technology and venture, and so he's taking both of those skill sets and marrying them with the rage of generative AI and building a really cool application to help companies create content. And this is a unique application for now that because it's using multimodal models in a user interface. So you can basically say you want a social post and it'll create both the text and the image and post it on social media for you. So super powerful. He's doing a great approach, I think. So I'm excited.
Yeah,
I'm excited about what he's doing.
So two of my takeaways, I'll give you a chance if you want to give a takeaway or two as well. One is the speed of execution here. So like we just said, with OpenAI moving super quick, Flamel is moving extremely quickly as well. They were able to build an MVP of this program pretty quickly, go out and raise some venture capital for it, and go and take a product to market in an extremely short time frame. So that was a big takeaway for me, is just the speed of execution here. I think that's becoming a more common thing. And the other one was just the use of data to create a cycle that improves itself. And that honestly is a big reason for why things are moving so fast in AI in general. The more data these models collect and you can feed back into it, the more they can improve themselves. And Paul and his team are taking advantage of that cycle. So those were two takeaways that I had. I don't know if you've got any addition to that.
Well, the reason I kind of stressed for now earlier when I was talking about how they're differentiating is how fast the space is moving. So they have to move fast. And so they're doing a great job of that. So kudos to them. And then as part of moving fast, and I asked him, how do you create a moat around your company? And you'll hear his answer. And he went into way more depth here, but they're using, data within a company, proprietary data, intertwining that with their own models, and then basically learning what the company is doing and how to serve them from a marketing perspective, and almost becoming like their own in-house marketing department and assistant, using their own data. And so that's key because it makes it more sticky, because it would be harder for that company to leave Flamel if they wanted to, because they'd have to retrain another model on how to for them. So it's super cool. Really like what he's doing and excited for it.
Yep. Let's dive into that interview.
All right. We've got Paul from Flamel. Paul, you and I connected on a call not too long ago. I reached out, wanted to learn more about what you were doing. Generative AI space is exploding right now. ChatGPT is all the rage. I saw you were building, in our own backyard here in the Mideast, or in the Midwest, and where are we at here? I can't say
Make
that
the
word.
call.
Well, you're up in Cincinnati, Covington area, and wanted to reach out and get you on the podcast and hear what you're up to. So tell us about, Flamel.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks so much for having me on, guys. So with Flamel, what we're trying to create is basically automated social media content. So leveraging, generative AI, and some automated data pipelining in a unique way to allow our users to build their social content kind of faster than they've ever built it, and more well-designed than they've ever built it before.
Yeah, and that's such a timely company to be building now with all of the generative AI and OpenAI, ChatGPT, all of the media attention on it right now. Talk a little bit about how this platform works. What kind of APIs is it built on? Talk about some of the nitty gritty around the AI software that you guys are leveraging.
Absolutely. So we're big fans of just move real fast, right? So we started off working on top of a couple of the OpenAI APIs, and then Stable Diffusion on the image side. And we really use those, again, to move fast. But then the idea that we're building towards is how can we make highly customized models for each specific customer? So I think we kind of identify that these large models are brilliant. They're super cool to play with, right? But at the end of the day, they lack a lot of specificity. And when it comes to social content, it needs to be highly specific to you, right? Like a rodeo cat in space is super cool to build, but it's not hyper usable to like a bakery down the street in Covington, And so that's what we're building towards now is how can we kind of leverage internal business data and brand identity to create embeddings that are hyper specific to them. So I think, starting really big and then ironically kind of getting smaller and more refined and kind of more customized models from there.
So there's a lot of different channels companies are marketing on, which have different types of content. I think one of the cool things that you've done is made this multimodal,
Yep.
where with one kind of workflow, you're able to generate multiple types of content that go into one post. Because with a post, you've got text, you've got maybe an image or a video, and so you're pulling these together. Talk about that and kind of what kind of lift that was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was one of the first things we identified as an opportunity in the market, right? Is you had these really large foundational models coming out, and they were coming out with a specific end case. Like you're building text out of it, you're building an image out of it, you're building audio out of it, etc. And we kind of had this like realization, like, hey, content's inherently multimodal, right? It's video, it's audio, it's text, it's image. They need to be related to each other. And if you could generate them at the same time, that would be fantastic. And so that's what we worked on doing. So that's where some intricate back end work going on there, basically making sure that we are kind of co-generating in a dependent way to build that content simultaneously.
Makes sense. And I want to back up for a second because I noticed this when I was doing a little bit of research on your company and looking through articles. You mentioned moving fast, and like this whole AI movement is brand new.
Yeah.
So talk about how quickly you've actually built this company and like what some of the steps that you took when you saw this trend coming with generative AI.
Yeah, so I think been following kind of generative AI, just like being in like the venture and tech space for a couple of years now, right? Like I remember when Dolly first came out, it was like freaking mind blowing.
Yeah.
And so I would say like been a fanboy for years, and then kind of had the concept late last year, right? So kind of late mid-October timeframe. And from there, just moved hyper quick. So we ended up closing our initial fundraising round a month kind of after we concepted the idea. Got a beta out kind of a month after that. That was just absolutely terrible. I wish I had some pictures of just like how crappy the UI was. It was like a multi-step, like 10-step process to get to the end. And it's like, nobody's going to use this.
Yeah.
And then pushed V1 about 3 weeks ago. So I'd say over the course of, actively 3.5, 4 months, we kind of laid the groundwork of raising the round, getting V1 out the door, got our first paying customers, which is super exciting, and starting to build the team. So we're like a team of 4.5 people now, which is, we probably won't keep up the person per month rate for a bit, but it's cool right now.
Yeah, one of the things that I think because the space is moving so fast and it's becoming very crowded, how do you build a moat or how do you differentiate yourself building on top of these models? One of the things that I hear, VCs talking about and I see on Twitter all the time is, don't just build a wrapper. Try to figure out something, proprietary or unique to your own data that you can leverage these models with. Talk about how you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is I think ironically, we're a generative AI company. I think one of our main things we operate off of is that AI alone won't win. So there's going to be millions of these kind of point solutions that come out, right? That allow you to do a thing. And for us, the way we kind of think about winning is threefold. The first one is full workflow. So like right now, even with a lot of these automated tools, you still have to go into kind of multiple different pieces of software to get from concepted idea, created idea, edited to schedule post and analytics, right? So first of all, hey, how can we just build that all into one kind of automated workflow? The second one, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, and that's where it's leveraging business data. And I think that's where we'll have our biggest advantage, because once we start getting businesses to kind of integrate their data sources into our engine, it makes very little sense to like leave after you've had something building content for you, because like the cost of replacement is your time and energy, not just kind of the capital you're spending on it, right? And then the final one, and what we're starting to build towards as well, is this idea of kind of continual learning on the back end. So I think the way a lot of social media content works right now, and a lot of the platforms out there work, is that you can see performative analytics, right? And it's like, cool, massive dashboard, every variable known to man on there. I may know what some of them mean, I may not. And to us, and what's super interesting about working within generative AI is we can then use that data to inform the model, right? And basically continuously improve the company's content over time as they create more content. And I think what we see a lot is companies like, they think of brand periodically. Like they kind of look around, they go, oh crap, like our brand's not good, we need to improve it. So then they go hire an agency or they do a lot of in-house work. So there's just like stepwise function of brand improvement. but then they don't touch it for a while. So it slowly degrades over time, just like existing in the wild, until they finally say that same thing. They go back out and do it again. And what we're trying to build is just this continuously improving machine, right? That as you have more business data and as you have more content out there, we're constantly training your specific model to improve your content for you.
Where are you pulling the data about these businesses from? So you mentioned pulling their internal data. Is it
Yeah.
blogs? Is it their own wikis? Give us an idea of where you're pulling that from.
Yeah, so the initial easy stuff is, yeah, kind of scraping existing content, right? The more powerful data is that we are starting to build some API data integrations into different things. So we're picking a few niches to start off with. So like one of them is like gyms and fitness centers and wellness centers. There is a gym management solution called MindBody, which has like the majority of gyms in the US on it. I think they have over like 60,000 gyms and spas and wellness centers on it. And so from there, it's kind of their all-in-one management solution. So they post their classes, they manage their members, they manage their instructors. And so what we're doing by that is scraping that type of data and building content out of that. So you can imagine an automated post Monday morning that has your class schedule. And then we see, hey, you teach yoga classes. So the day before yoga classes, we're going to generate yoga tips and highlights to post out onto your socials that are then going to call to that class there. Or you just added a new member to the team. We're automatically going to create that post and say, hey, welcome to the team, Logan, like, join the community and work out, for your first time. We're then going to prompt you to upload a picture of them. Because again, it's not always generative AI. Like generative AI right now can't just go build a post of a random person it doesn't know. And so we'll just prompt you to, hey, use your phone camera to put it in there. So that's kind of a taste of that, right? It's this idea that there is super interesting business data that can be turned into content that is highly specific and relevant to what you're doing. And that's kind of where we're starting with that.
Man, the future you're describing in terms of like content creation and how that blends with social media and like building a brand on social media, just because we've been so intimately involved in that with Middle Tech, and we've seen how much work goes into creating content and building a brand. Just talk a little bit about what this future looks like in your mind. Like you've now been close to building it and having this vision for where you want it to go. You've seen what it can do. What happens to content creation and like brand building and social media when generative AI is at its, when it gets to a further point, when it gets to, a further iteration of where it is now?
Yeah, I think it unlocks creativity is what I'm trying to get to, right? Like I think social content specifically is this weird thing that like has to be high quality, has to be high quantity, takes a lot of time to build, but then exists in the ether for 10 seconds or 2 seconds, right? And so to me, it's like, hey, how can we figure out how to make this highly specific, high quality, do it for you so that you can then spend the unlocked 95% of your time doing high level strategy, right? And like high level creative work. And I think it gives you the time to challenge yourself to build that content or build those marketing efforts that can be more impactful, right? Whereas social, in my opinion, is all about two things. It's all about brand awareness and trust. I don't know about you guys, whenever I shop a new company, go to a new restaurant, like whatever, I always check their socials. And if it's like weird, I'm like, this is a weird company. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do here, right? And so I think to us, it's like, how can we take out some of this work that is some of the more tedious work within kind of the creative sphere and allow you to then say, hey, what can we really do that's next level,
Do you think consumers care if they're looking at a brand, whether or not it's AI generated? Like if I'm looking at a brand, and it probably depends on what type of company it is, but what's your thoughts on that?
I love that question. I think it's a really good one. And I don't know if we know the answer to that yet, right? Because at the same time, it's gotten to the point where it's so good now. I don't know if you could differentiate if it's I recently saw one that does like AI generated models for like clothing companies, right? They all look like real people, and I've never obviously met anyone like that before, so who knows? To me, though, one of the that's why we're doing that business specific data, I think, is that like it's still being driven from reality and truth, right? It's like, hey, this is a physical class schedule, or like this is a person in the community, or this is a dish on your menu, right? But I think it makes a difference. I think there's some fields out there that you may need that trust, right? Like if you're a doctor and all of your content's like artificially generated, does that affect my trusting relationship with you? Maybe, but I really don't know if we know yet, kind of as a human species, what that kind of relationship is yet.
Yeah, for sure. Talk about funding. So You mentioned you did a round pretty quickly. Talk about the dynamic of raising money for a generative AI company or an AI company in general these days.
Yeah.
Talk about that process and maybe the appetite there is for right now. It seems like VCs are riding the wave and know that this is a big movement on the level of desktop to mobile or
Yep.
the internet, or talk about what kind of scale this is and what VCs look at it as.
Yeah, I think we had two aspects that highly benefited us throughout this process. Like one is that I've just like worked in the venture space for 5 or 6 years, and so I definitely had built really meaningful connections and networks there, right? And I think fundraising is all about how fast can we build a trusting relationship that you think I'm a good fiduciary for your money, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is absolutely that kind of wave of interest. And so I think we just tried to capitalize on that, right? Like at the end of the day, it's all scratching and clawing to get what you can. And I think one of the ways we tried to differentiate was telling this story that like it's not a point solution. It's not just a generative AI company. Like we're trying to use generative AI as like an engine, a tool, but we're really putting this into this workflow that already had problems. And so the AI is more like I don't want to say it's an accessory because it's like more important than that, but it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle. And I think that story sold really well because with these big waves, especially in the Midwest, right? I think Midwest investors are like less prone to want to engage in like a big wave because they see it and they're like, oh, it's just the new crypto. It's going to crash. Like it's just the new this. It's just the new that. And so we tried to tell the story that sure, even if it does crash, it's an engine. It's a tool for us to leverage to build our company more effectively, right?
Yeah. Talk about, so basically what's happening right now is there's platforms that have existed previously, HubSpot, Hootsuite. They are probably, if not already, integrating generative AI into their existing workflows and customer base.
Yep.
How do you view the landscape of, is this going to be a displacement? And as a consumer, if I'm looking at options, am I going to go with something like a Flamel or Flamel? Wait, I messed up the name there. A Flamel or a Jasper AI, or am I going to go to the established players? How do you view that landscape? Because that is a big question I'm hearing now. Is, are you going to go with one that's just incorporating it into an existing platform or net new?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I think we don't know how that'll play out. Like, I'll be honest, they all absolutely are working on like integrating aspects of generative AI into their things. So like Adobe just released a really cool platform with it. Shutterstock has it. Shutterstock just announced like a full-on partnership with NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And Hootsuite, ironically, I think Hootsuite's like fairly far behind. They haven't announced kind of anything with regards to that, which is
their tech has always
me.
been pretty clunky.
So we built post scheduling in 2 days. And so it blows my mind that they have like a full massive monopolized business around it, right?
Yeah.
That's
I've
a whole
tried it
different
twice
conversation.
and I've churned both times because the user experience didn't.
Well, they
didn't do it
also
for me.
just got rid of their free tier. And so like I'm like, hey, heck, we're just gonna offer free scheduling and then get people on there. But anyway, so more appropriately to your question, to me it's really about verticalizing the solutions. And I don't think anybody's effectively doing that right now. So people are not effectively verticalizing kind of data input, content creation, content editing, posting, scheduling, and then kind of the analytics feedback loop into the model. And
Yeah.
so I think like we can go end to end more effectively. And the fact that we started with AI infused in places, it's honestly easier to build because the generative AI workflow for the user is like kind of intrusive. Like it's clippy, right? It's like a random little text box that you then have to put into all over your platform. So I think we've got some of that advantage. But again, for us, it's all about going deep with the data, right? Like Hootsuite doesn't have business data that everybody can't get. They just have kind of performative metrics from, the social channels. Canva, same difference, right? Where they're going to recommend you kind of what's hot and trending globally. They're not going to recommend you a specific post type with specific content based on the fact that you just added a Pilates class on Tuesdays. So I think that's where we're trying to differentiate. And if we're successful, absolutely makes sense for us to be an acquisition target from one of those big players, right? Where it's like, hey, they can bring in a plethora of kind of end-to-end workflow solutions. I'm crazy. Like I just want to beat them and just be bigger than them, right? Like that would be my goal, is just like I look at Hootsuite and Canva as just targets, I think.
I
For
love
sure.
that. I think one of my favorite parts of what you talked about, how you guys built the solution, is the feedback loop, like providing the analytics back into the system. Just because I've been reading so much around like how these AI, language models, or how these AI models improve themselves. Being able to have that learning system take place, that feedback loop, it just allows for things to improve so much quicker than anything we've really ever interfaced with before. So I love that you guys have taken that approach, because I think that's probably one of the most fascinating parts of artificial intelligence and of machine learning, is how quickly you can create that feedback loop and make changes that actually impact the outputs. So maybe
Yeah.
just hit on that a little bit deeper, that aspect of your platform.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like it's always fascinating to me. I'm like, this is all just sci-fi. It's like magic.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting is we kind of think of it in a couple different ways. So like the obvious one is, yeah, there's the immediate feedback loop for the specific use case of each client, right? And they each have that. But then what gets even more interesting, I think, is we can anonymize that data, right? And then if we have 50 gyms doing that, or it's 15 gyms in the Cincinnati area, right? And we can kind of, you start building these overlapping kind of circles of data and knowledge that's learning on itself. And so that's where I think we can get to this hyper real-time content creation thing, where it's like, hey, you're a gym in Cincinnati, and you've got a Pilates class. The temperature just dropped below 45. Post this now, right? And so that's where we can start leveraging the data beyond the individual clients and leveraging it on like an ecosystem wide manner. And I think like right now that happens, you get like, hey, this is trending in my industry, right? Like that's kind of the extent of that now. But it doesn't become actionable. And I think that's where we can take that aspect of the business to the next level, where it's just a flywheel. So every company, we add flywheels data into every other company we're working with.
Yeah, I think we have a good idea of what makes you excited about it. I mean, you're building a company, so you're
Yeah.
excited about what you're building. You're excited about what you're incorporating into your product. But what are some of the biggest societal risks do you think that come along with AI? What are some things that worry you, or that you're already seeing that are negatives?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is impersonation, right? Like I think there's been a few like high level examples of that have come out. I think the counter to that is like photoshopping people has existed for 25 years now and the world didn't end. But the scarier thing to me is like the video reproduction and how
Mm.
good that quality's gotten now, and kind of voice reproduction, where it's like, hey, I'm Logan now, and you could never tell, and I'm just gonna record it, like make a video of you saying some, unsultry things.
Yeah, I think a
Um,
lot of the content right now in that realm is funny. They're memes. They're Joe Biden talking to Trump and Obama playing a video game
yeah,
at the
it's the
same
Joe Rogan
time.
podcast with all
Yeah,
AI people, right?
exactly. It's
Uh,
that kind of stuff, or it's Trump getting arrested. Those
yeah,
are some crazy photos.
it
But
is.
there's going to be the day when people are using those for malice.
Yeah, people will destabilize governments with it, right? Where it's just like, um, you at the end of the day, people have to be their own judge on what content they believe is real and what content they believe is not real, and this is just going to make that harder to do. um, so I think that's an absolute societal concern, and for us, I think that's where I like the B2B space, because it's like, we're going to
Yeah.
need business data. Like, I mean, yeah, do what you want with your menu or your classes or your whatever it is. I think I would be concerned if I was building like Runway ML or something like that, where it's just like these crazy powerful video tools.
Yeah. I guess
for
to,
sure.
to wrap it up here, give your advice to the listeners on how to keep up with this space, maybe some resources or just general advice in the AI realm. If somebody wants to get involved, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, the way I got involved was the obvious ones: follow on Twitter, follow on LinkedIn, right? Like there's just constant news. Like with how fast everything's dropping, I think Twitter is almost the best place for this news, because it's like literally every day it's, hey, this massive foundational model just dropped. Outside of that, the thing I always do when I get something interested in something is I always go to like who's doing the core research of it. So I go onto like Google Scholar and find like 35 people, and then I just email them all, and they're all like researchers, so they want to talk about the stuff, right? And so like that's, I just go do that. So like when I first started this company, that was like one of the first things I did, and talk to people from like Germany, France, Japan, all over the world. And they're the ones that are actually on the forefront, right? Like where it's like, oh, I built this in Google's research lab and I published it yesterday, and you called me today. Like they're willing to talk to you. So if you want to go deep, I would recommend that. If you want to just see what's happening, Twitter's just lit up with it constantly.
Yeah, I love that. Geez, that's the entrepreneur's way of just like figuring out how to get the best information going in and
It
just
was
cold
funny.
emailing
So
people.
like our deck was like a crappy little deck. It was like 10 slides. And like the whole premise of it was like, hey, we can take a backpack and make it look like it's in a different setting with AI. Like that was like the premise of the technological advancements that we were talking about. And so there was a guy named Renan Gal overseas in Israel who built like textual inversion, which is the process of like recontextualizing with AI. So I just emailed the guy and I was like, hey man, this is super cool. Do you want to like work with me? He's like, no, I've got like a really good offer from Google, but like here's how I did this. It's like super cool. You should think about it. And that was literally what kind of formed the core of our fundraising process.
That's so cool. That's awesome. Well, man, we're coming up on time here for this interview, but Paul, thanks so much for coming on and talking about Flamel, and best of luck to you. I'm sure we'll be checking back in with you after you guys have been around for more than a year. I mean, it's crazy how much you guys have accomplished in this short amount of time. So kudos to you guys for that. Good luck as you continue to build, and I'm sure we'll be talking here soon.
Thanks so much, guys. It was great being on.
See ya.